These big remote adventures and expeditions are very much about just running away from real life, because it's so much easier to go walk across a desert than it is to just cope with normal life.
The voice of Alastair Humphreys, a man who has the word adventurer literally on his business card. There are a few other descriptive titles and words on there too, though they really do flow from adventuring, because Alastair is a man who has adventured to the most incredible remote places. Cycling across the world on a shoestring budget, crossing the ocean in a rowing boat, running across a desert, just for fun, I might add. Sort of 9-to-5 activity, the everyday one. Oh, what should we do today? Should you run across a desert? Yeah, why not? Let's just get through this fence here. Oh, gate, rather. Crossing the railway, and with Barnes today. Come on, Barnes, quick. Want to get across before the train comes. Are we okay? Red light one way, amber the other. So I looked up adventure, or adventured, on the World Wide Wonder, and it came up with this: adventured, to engage in daring or risky activity. They had adventured into the forest, or adventured, put one's life or money at risk. He adventured 300 quid in the purchase of land. Or he adventured to the top of Everest in driving sharp, sub-zero blizzards. But adventured, adventuring, adventure, a lot of the definitions seem to indicate that it either needs to be, a brave or bold pursuit, something that ranges from mild discomfort, either mental or physical, to exceptional danger. But you know, not everyone is able to walk great peaks or conquer challenges on a more magnificent scale. Adventures can mean all sorts of things, including getting across this path that's certainly become less passable in the last 24 hours. We've had a lot of rain. So for those of you who don't or can't get out for these big adventures, I'm hoping that my guest today, Alastair Humphreys, may impress upon you the very notion that the impressive scale of what you choose to conquer isn't necessarily the barometer of the word adventure. It's not about the size of the mountain you climb, but the joy and the satisfaction you receive by achieving, more modest, maybe humble plans, such as getting across that mud. And you might rightly now say, whoa, Neil, hang about. Rewind, back up a little. You've just mentioned cycling around the world, crossing the ocean and running across a desert. And yes, you'd be right. But our Alastair met the adventuring equivalent of hitting the runner's wall, a wall which he found in a small red tent in Greenland as he was practicing, or acclimatizing is probably the correct word, for a major expedition to the South Pole. And it wasn't so much a physical one, it was more a mental one, which has led to doing what he now refers to as micro-adventures, which we can all achieve because these come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. There's a wonderful quote to go with today's show. Adventure starts with standing still. And I couldn't find who that was originally attributed to, but it describes perfectly the literal journey that I talk with Alastair about.
Today on the Photowalk.
I don't really consider myself any sort of adrenaline junkie. I like being alive and intend to stay that way. A lot of the time I was quite sad, out of my depth, certain I was going to fail, close to giving up, and they're quite introspective times. But then equally, I persevered. I kept on going. The hardest mile or the longest mile of a journey is just stepping across your doorstep and beginning. Yeah. And it's the sort of truism that we hear quite often, but it really resonates with me to put a name to the way I was actually feeling. So as I rode through Turkey, heading towards the Syrian border, and I was going to ride through Lebanon, I realized I was so afraid. What was I afraid of? I'd never been to this place before, and yet my preconceptions had built into me this fear. So by going out locally and actually taking my camera with me, so not my phone, but an actual camera held in my actual hand, just kept reminding me to slow down, to look, to pay attention, to be curious.
411 episodes in today, the Photowalk, a show where we walk and make pictures, photographically sketchbooking our time together each week. Enjoying the letters, the inspirational stories that you've sent in, and listening back to special studio conversations with guests from around the world, photographers and walkers and adventurers like Alastair Humphreys. And before I give you a flavour of today's mailbag, thank you to our extra milers and mpb.com who sponsor this show and keep us here week on week on week. mpb.com, it is a website where you can safely buy and sell and trade quality used photo and video gear online, and you become part of the circular economy. This camera that I take out every single week with me, the X100V, the Fujifilm X100V, that's from mpb.com. If you're buying, you get peace of mind because it comes with a 6-month guarantee. And if you are trading or selling some camera gear or video gear, MPB will send a courier. They'll pick up your kit on a day that you say, I'm in. And once it's arrived back at their warehouse and they've gone through all the checks to make sure that you've graded it properly when you were on the website, they'll pay you direct into your account quickly. mpb.com is a very easy to use website. It's helping photographers to buy quality used kit or sell gear that we no longer need so we can free up some cash and give others a chance to make their stories with camera gear that we once loved. Go to mpb.com. I will have a link, of course, on today's show page. Today also on the show, then, a friend of the show who you'll be familiar with when you hear him help answer a question. And this is the question, does the stuff of adversity actually help you find your creative side? Photographing the Kangurang Festival. All will be explained. We tackle the why of life and photography a few times today, and once courtesy of a Nat Geo photographer's quote that I think sums up perfectly what photography was perhaps made for. Usually it being the second Friday of the month, a street photographer and photography mentor, Valerie Jardin, would be here with visual stories, though this has moved to next week's show. Right, shall we walk then? Checklist out. Coffee, check. Garibaldi's, check. Walking boots, we need those today, check. And anything that keeps the rain and the wind out, check. Let's walk. I think my sketchbook images today should probably just be about mud, and more glorious mud. Oh, Barnes, we're going home in a shocking state today, I can tell straight away. Now, a brisk public announcement to do with a survey, the show survey, which is on the website, photowalk.show. Now, I realise some people play catch-up on this show, and the survey actually is revealing that. So you won't necessarily have had the chance to join in if you're hearing this in a couple of weeks' time, but by the time we get to December 22nd, that's the date, the cut-off date for the show survey, there will have been plenty of people in terms of what was considered from my radio days a fair number to gain an idea of listenership patterns and likes and dislikes and all that kind of stuff. Always room for more. The more the merrier. The more is actually good for the survey. Now, I've had a few people ask, why would you ask questions that might influence what you do? By virtue of a survey, obviously. Just do what you do. It's a podcast, Neil. That's the point of a podcast, isn't it? And to some extent, that's a good point. Though I know building this community of walkers with a camera is something that's, it's larger than me simply putting my guessing finger in the air and seeing which way the wind blows. Although the guessing finger in the air has been pretty good, I like to think, over the last couple of years. But sometimes you just need a helping hand. And It certainly stems from my radio days, where we would test and sample ideas, material and songs. Not everything, but just enough to keep us grounded so we didn't become radio bosses in ivory towers, believing that we always knew best. And if you want to grow an audience, or in terms of, community, I call it community, just asking folk to like and subscribe apparently isn't enough. But this survey, there's a but in there, Neil. I'm not quite sure. I like the sound of a but. Well, it's a guide. It's a very useful one. It doesn't mean that everything that you say will be implemented, no. But it is a good guide, a strong guide, a very useful guide. I do have my pulled up as far as Simon Cowell big boy pants on, because some of the comments have been, let's just call them reasonably forthright. Remember last year when somebody said, stop your blathering? So with that said, thank you for the helping hand. Please, if you're listening at the right time, continue to send me your thoughts and tick those check boxes. And let's get to the letters that you've been sending in, starting with John Kenny. Bit of backstory perhaps is needed. Dwayne Patton was my guest in episode 407, the one titled A Near-Death Experience and Photographic Epiphany. The titles, by the way, sometimes the thing that take the longest to organise or to think of. And in this episode, Australian Dwayne Patton talked about a health event when he wasn't very old, actually. He was aged just 31. But it changed his life outlook and introduced photography to him. And in particular, photographing birds and wildlife. I love that he now lives in 125 acres of bushland, doing his bit for the world, recording and monitoring the wonderful nature of Australia. Hi Neil, says John. Just finished listening to your talk with Dwayne Patton and how he had no interest in photography until after his cardiac arrest. Fantastic to hear his passion for what he does and how he always seems to be trying to look for ways to give back. I'm glad that came through, because that's what I thought about Dwayne. Certainly that's what I thought about Dwayne. Coincidentally, I've also just been reading F8 documentary number 13, says John, which contained excerpts from one of your former guests, David Gilbert Wright's many projects, this one called Survivors, which is an amazing project, you're right. The website page, which I will link to on the show page today, doesn't actually have any text on there, which would fill in the gaps to the people or the portraits that you see. But just so you know, when you look at the pictures, it's essentially portraits of real people who've gone through a traumatic or life-changing event. The photographer, David, says John, says that most, though not all the people interviewed as part of the project, engaged in creativity in a wider context which allowed them to flourish after facing adversity. That would be akin to that experience by your guest, Dwayne, I think. And you'd be right, I think it does. Perhaps there's grounds to think, says John, that creativity, however it manifests, plays a much more important role to the human spirit than it's given credit for. I wonder if Sean Tucker, he says, came across anything in terms of this whilst researching his book, The Meaning in the Making, how adversity is often a driver to creative thinking. You see, John, I really can't answer this question myself, but I know a man who probably can, although I'll need to cross to my studio self to speak with him. Sean, your book, Meaning in the Making, was a very personal account, and there's adversity in there too. How you talk about your life and how creativity has played an important role in, we'll call it healing, because there's healing within the book.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I can answer this question either. I'll give it a crack, though. I mean, I think the best example in the book is there's a whole chapter on shadows in the book. And, you know, I've made a few videos on this subject as well, where I kind of start by talking about the photography of something, but then use it as a bit of a life philosophy. So there are two in particular, one called Protect Your Highlights and one called Embrace Your Shadows. And that's because of the way that I expose an image is to protect the highlights first, which means that the dynamic range of the camera, which isn't going to match your eye, means that your shadows fall very dark.
Yeah.
So those two videos, but also end up being a little bit of a life philosophy. And the Embrace Your Shadows one particularly, I talk about the fact that if you don't have shadows, you don't have an image. Because if you expose something that's just light, it's a white rectangle or whatever aspect ratio you're shooting. There's nothing interesting about it. It's the shadows that shape the light to let you know what you're looking at, right? And then to use that as a life philosophy, it sort of helped me to realize that in two ways. One, the shadows that I passed through in my life, those difficult times, those tough times, those adversities, are the things that I believe now help me tell a better story with my life. Without them, I might not have very much to say. You know, in the video, I use the example of Nelson Mandela. Obviously, I grew up in South Africa. And, you know, this is a guy who spent 27 years of his life in jail. You know, I mean, it could have gone the other way. He could have turned into bitterness and come out. And we could have been in a world of hell. But actually, that one man rescued, and I felt this keenly, rescued a country from chaos, but turned his adversity into an incredible story and a lot of redemption for a whole nation. And I feel like maybe it takes us going through those shadows because they shape us. Like I really believe that we're forged in the shadows. And I think we have if we go through them well and we allow them to shape us in good ways, we then come out as artists on the other side having much more interesting things to say because of those dark times.
It's like the world of the struggling artist. Maybe what you're suggesting here, perhaps, is adversity is sort of key to this.
I think it's important. Yeah, I really do. Oh gosh, this is going to sound a little judgy, but I'll overstate it, but hopefully, you know, I'm not saying it this strongly, but I think you can be born with a silver spoon in your mouth and never hit any struggle. And actually, you might not have as much to say. I can see where everything that I put out into the world that really hits people, I can point to the occasion or the event in my life where something really hard happened that taught me that lesson. Yeah. It's very rarely that I say something that's important that hits people emotionally and helps them go, wow, okay, that's helped me rethink my life a little bit. It didn't come out of a sunny day on a beach. It came out of a rough time, that lesson, often. Yeah. But because I tried to go through it well and learn the lesson from it, I'm able to give something that helps people in their dark time or their shadow that they're passing through. And I want to be careful and say that I think there's also a danger on the flip side of it, where you can glorify the struggling artist or the dark things you go through and dig in. I think there is a danger in that, and you don't have to manufacture darkness to be a good artist. I think there's a really dark road you can go down if you think that way. That's not what it's about. And it's almost, if you do that, it's contrived and it's fake anyway. You know, it has to be those genuine life experiences that come along, being present to that adversity in a way that is true and honest, and feeling the pain of that, but trying to bring something redemptive out of it, I think gives you a ton of material to talk about in your work.
I keep coming back to, and forgive me for this, for those who will say he's not going to mention the Tom Hanks line in I keep saying A League of Gentlemen, but it's A League of Their Own, isn't it? The baseball film, where he says to one of his players who wants to quit the team, he says, "That's it, is it? That's it. You're just quitting." And she says, "Well, it's hard. It's hard." And his name is Jimmy. It's Jimmy Duggan, isn't it? In this, his character, it's hard. And he says, "It's supposed to be hard. It's the hard that when you succeed makes it so good." And I suppose that's what adversity is, isn't it?
Yeah. And it doesn't make it feel better, you know. Like I think
I want it to feel better. I want to come out.
Well, yeah, we all do. Right. I think there's a danger in what I'm saying. People might go, "Oh, he's just saying while you're in this difficult spot, you need to think about all the brilliant art you're going to make later." That's not really going to help you right now, and it shouldn't. You should feel as bad as it feels to go through this, because that's part of facing it and being present to it well, and hopefully healing quicker, because you're not shoving it down or repressing it, you know? Yeah. But it's just to keep in the back of your mind that everyone goes through tough stuff. Everybody goes through tough stuff. And maybe it means that in the bigger picture, if you zoom right out and look at your life at the end of it, you can see that light and shade throughout your life. And your life looks like a more beautiful picture for the shadows and the light that you went through. And you're going through a shadow right now, and that sucks. It sucks, and it should suck, because that's how it should feel. But as part of the whole, it might mean you're telling a more beautiful story with your life and have more to say with your work in the long run.
What from your conversations with others, just finally, have you gleaned about adversity leading to creativity? Straight away, you see, Simon Baxter comes to my mind. You made this wonderful film about him, and you've gone on to be a good friend of his, and he of yours. His story is a great example of that, isn't it? Of adversity leading to this enormous explosion of creativity in his life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing a talk at the moment about the book, and he's part of that talk. I'm talking about him as an example and saying that, this is a guy who, has a back injury and was doing web design at the time and sitting at a computer for hours at a day. Any doctor will tell you is not good if you have a back injury.
No.
So their diagnosis or their suggested, remedy for that was to go on long walks. So he did. He started to go for walks in the forest and then got a dog, took Meg with him, and then got a camera because he was taking photos on his phone and it looked good, and it's got a camera and started to, now for my money, he is by far and away one of the best woodland photographers working in the world today. And that all came out of adversity, difficulty, and choosing to get up and try and, reach for the light a bit. If you speak to him, he'll tell you, I'm sure, how painful that injury was and is and to deal with, but he's making something beautiful out of it. And his work, to me, speaks on the one hand of how we should take care of these beautiful spaces, but also how we can turn something difficult into something beautiful. And that doesn't make it less painful in a way, but the redemptive material that can come out of it helps you and helps others in the long run.
My thanks to Sean for popping up to answer that question. And, it's time for an announcement. Another one, Neil. Another micro announcement. Oh, I think this one's quite a big announcement. In 2024, the philosophical YouTuber and photographer, filmmaker, author as well. Yes, of course, Sean Tucker will feature on the third Friday of each month as it stands at the moment, and he'll answer questions I have about the creative process. When I say I actually want to extend the offer to you and our extra milers, questions that you may well have, thoughts, perhaps conversation starters, because I think that would be great for this particular feature. And if you'd like to send those in, then here's the email address. It is stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show. A question, a theme, something that links perhaps with your own creativity and photography. His first appearance will be Thursday, 18th of Jan, which is the day before I leave for the Gambia for Africa 24. I'm going a little ahead of those coming on our Photowalk African retreat, which by the way still has a place. I know. It's next month. It's quite close now, but it's certainly not too late. And if what you hear today from adventurer Alastair Humphreys in a moment makes you think, hang about, let me go and have an adventure with Neil and friends, then you'll find all the details on our website, Photowalk Show. Just look for the menu item, which is Africa 24. Does exactly what it says on the tin. Favourite advertising expression of all time. I haven't made any sketchbook images yet. It's a featureless sky. It's another one of those blah skies, but I'm walking along the riverbank. I've gone a slightly different way to the route that I usually take. The walk that it takes us a bit further away from the railway line and the pinstriped express. That's why you probably, I don't think we've heard any yet, have we? No, not one yet. But let me take a picture back along the path, back towards the lock. In fact, I can put the lock in the middle of the tree that's just arching over the path. Oh, it's like it was almost planned. I'm using my X100 today, X100V, f4, shutter speed 1/2/5, ISO 250, and let's have those branches just drooping over the path. There we go. A sketchbook. Now that one should have come at least 10-15 minutes ago to start the day. Anyway, where were we? Yes, for my other listener, who's thinking, hang about Africa, I don't have a passport. I'll never get one in time. You'll also be joining us on the adventure. Don't worry. Although it'll be a podcast episode, you won't get to feel the heat of a late evening or the bird song, which is beautiful in that part of Africa as the sun goes down. But you'll be joining us as a podcast episode, possibly two actually, really, when I think about the things we'll be experiencing. One of those things being the kangarang. The what, Neil? The kangarang. We've talked about this before, haven't we? I think we briefly mentioned it when I was, it's months and months and months ago, actually, when I was walking with Jason Florio on one of our photo walks. Cue some music, make us feel like we're in Africa. Please, if you would, Neil back in studio. The kangarang is an incredible thing to photograph. Now, I first witnessed the kangarang quite unexpectedly when I was driving across the country on a dirt road between villages near the coast. A man dressed in leaves stepped out onto the road, followed by several lads in tow. Now, the man dressed in leaves, with a mask on, was dancing and waving this huge stick, though some carry a machete for tradition. And this character, this kangarang, as I learned later on that evening when I got back to the house and said, what was that I saw on the road? He represents a protective spirit. He is the exorcist of evil spirits, which is an important job in anyone's working week. But when you're driving along a road between villages, just enjoying that open road toward the coast at midday, kicking up the orange dust, watching it in the rear-view mirror, small pleasures, drinking in the warm air that's whisking into the cabin. You know, when all this is going on and somebody steps out dressed in leaves with a large stick, I can't lie, it's a bit of an eye-opener. But as I say, when you find out what the festival is all about, you get into photographing when you come across some of them are micro festivals, some of them are larger festivals. You're photographing what is it's a rite of passage for young men of the Gambia. That's what this whole tradition of the kangarang, the man in the leaves. It's not always leaves. But traditionally it's leaves. Suit with the mask, and we are there during the festival of the kangarang, which as I say, and I did have to look this bit up, is a ritual that teaches the younger boys of Manding, or the Mandinka, which is I think it's the largest West African ethnic group. He says, wincing through the air, hoping that I'm right about that, the ancient rules of their community. That's what it's teaching them. They learn about medicinal plants and hunting techniques and all those really important sorts of things. So that's what the kangarang is. We're also going to be visiting a school as documentary photographers. We're going up the river on boats to explore the forest and learn about the history and also the challenges, actually. This is going to be, we're not just going to parts of the country that are blessed by beautiful wildlife, though we will be. We're also taking a very real look at the country, a very authentic look at the country, because there are some ecological challenges. And Jason Florio, photojournalist Jason Florio, is going to help us come away with our own stories of our adventure in West Africa. Photo stories that are rich with experience and narrative. Boy, has this wind got up. I tell you what, I'm looking forward to the weather. I really am. Oof. Of West Africa in late Jan to early Feb. Anyway, I think the key word here is adventure, which is a very, very good moment to introduce this week's guest, Alastair Humphreys. Let me read you some words from his website. Humphreys is clearly slightly bonkers, and this is a wonderful thing, says Geographical magazine. He is an adventurer. He is a blogger. He's an author, a speaker, a filmmaker, a motivator. Alastair tells stories to encourage people to live more adventurously every day, to engage with and also care, actually, for the natural world. That's part of his message for those that do go adventuring. He's a man who actively encourages people to embrace their curiosity muscle. Oh, I like that expression. He's a National Geographic Adventurer of the Year. He's written 14 books. He produces a monthly newsletter with inspiration about why and how you can live more adventurously. And you know, with an introduction like that, you may well be thinking, hang on, here's a man who's clearly fearless, like the Greek god of adventure. But I think, as you're about to find out, explorers and adventurers don't all fit neatly into a single box that holds only heroic, intrepid, bold, daring superhumans. I'd like you to meet, for part one of two parts today, a very down-to-earth adventurer whose honesty and vulnerability, when you consider what he's achieved, just may surprise you. Here's Alastair Humphreys. Adventure, Alastair, is a word that can mean so many things, as we'll find out in today's conversation. But I'm trying, if you will, to sort of set up our chat. So, what does adventure mean to you?
So adventure to me right now is about curiosity and newness and surprise and trying to find those things in an enthusiastic sort of way. And that's very much broader and murkier and wider than it was when I first started, when it was all about Ranulph Fiennes, go do something insanely hardcore, and if you get to chop your fingers off at the end, then so much the better.
Taking risks is a part of this, isn't it?
It is, but that is not part of my natural makeup. And I think probably I wanted to start to do adventures in order to try and dare myself to be a bit more risky and bold and try and become a bit more of the sort of person I'd like to be than my natural wimpy, lazy sort of self. So yeah, it's a conscious choice to try to be a bit bolder, but I don't consider myself a risk taker at all, and I don't really consider myself any sort of adrenaline junkie. It's I like being alive and intend to stay that way. So yeah, I'm definitely not a risky adrenaline sort of guy.
Adventure in terms of risk, and I'll come back to it, because for some more risk averse people, and I'm surprised to hear you say that you're quite risk averse. You're one of the last people I would have thought of as risk averse, but there's a sort of buttism approach to adventure, isn't there? Yeah, but it's okay for Alastair because he's done X, or yeah, but it's all right for them because they don't have a mortgage, or yeah, but the buttism, there's long lists of it. There's somebody who mentors in adventuring. Are they words that make your heart sink a bit?
They are annoying words, but there is also some truth to them, I suppose, in terms of trying to have the time or the money or the opportunity or the ability or the fitness, all these sorts of things. There's certainly a huge element of luck and privilege to going off on big adventures. And that's what led me, as I moved away from big expeditions towards trying to encourage people to small little micro adventures, was exactly this notion of listening to what was stopping people. And it's usually, generally speaking, it's either I haven't got enough time or I haven't got enough money.
And inadequacy is another one that you mentioned, which I thought was an interesting one. This sort of gremlin on our shoulders shouting, who do you think you are? You can't do this.
I think certainly from the adventurer types I know and have read about, there's a lot of chip on the shoulder. I'm going to prove to you that I can do this sort of thing. Yeah. And that was very much the case for me. I always felt a bit just annoyingly average and a bit rubbish at everything, and I didn't really like that about myself. And so I definitely decided to try to cycle around the world to try and prove something to myself and perhaps to the world as well. But yeah, certainly I was driven on by that sort of imposter feeling early on.
Well, this is a good segue then to talk about your cycling adventure. I can't believe life savings of £7,000 would be enough to provide the adventure. It was 4 years, wasn't it? 4 years of adventure cycling around the world, all done on £7,000.
7,000 quid, plus I should add the amount of random people out in the world who invited me into their home and fed me well, and I basically ate the entire contents of their fridge. So there was certainly aspects of that. Also, as I was cycling around the world, I was raising money for a charity. So I gave loads and loads of, hundreds of talks in schools around the world. And that sort of network of schools talks started to work into a really nice thing of me essentially getting bed and breakfast in cities in exchange for talking to hundreds of kids at assembly the next morning. But yeah, it was an extremely frugal project. And you have a choice. You could either say, cycle through Las Vegas and have a massive blowout of champagne and hotels and roulette wheels, or you can camp just outside Las Vegas, sleep in a ditch, eat banana sandwiches, and then cycle through the city the next day and on back out into the desert. So it was a case of choosing just to live really cheap in order that the money could last into a longer journey.
There were some intriguing characters that you met. I didn't know about one of these characters until we were talking just briefly before we turned the recording on as such. Chris Herwig, who you met on the Russian part of your tour. He was. Now, this is a photographic connection as well, because he was photographing, what was it, Soviet bus stops, which is a bit of a niche, isn't it? It's a bit of a niche.
Yeah, it's very niche. So, yeah, this is when I cycled around the world, as I mentioned, I stayed with lots of people who were very kind. One person who invited me in was Chris Herwig, a Canadian photographer. He was living in Kazakhstan with his wife, and I guess for his hobby while he was living in the old Soviet Union was going out photographing Soviet bus stops, which vary between some brutalist architecture to some really sort of funky modernist designs to then things like a giant hat or concrete swan. So wonderful stuff. And then like all good photography projects, he started then to get a bit obsessed about it. And then he started patrolling Google Maps satellite views, scouring the Soviet Union for more remote bus stops to photograph, and it's a long passion project that he's made a book about, which is really fantastic. Lovely photographs. That's in my mind, I love that when photography is also an excuse to go have an adventure and vice versa, and that took him all over the Soviet Union. It's fantastic.
I dare say when you started cycling, and correct me if I'm wrong, you may not necessarily have thought of it as a photographic project as well, but of course that's an important way to record your journeys, your adventures.
At the risk of getting cancelled from your photography podcast,
you won't
a mere 10 minutes into our chat, I took a camera with me cycling around the world. I went in 2001, so I was trying to decide, do I get a film camera or digital? Will these digital cameras ever take off? And I set off with a 1 megapixel digital camera, but I actually wasn't really very interested in photography at all. I'd take a few pictures here or there. I didn't take much effort with them, just sort of holiday snaps, I suppose. My camera, when I sailed across the Atlantic to get from Africa to South America, and during that crossing, someone chucked a bag across the boat, broke my camera. So then for South America, I just bought a little instant camera. So for 6 months in South America, I just had one instant disposable camera and wasn't too fussed about it. I now look back with horror about 6 months in Patagonia, and I only took about 10 photographs. It's just painful. But it was a different way of experiencing the world. I really was interested in trying to become a writer, and so that was my priority. And I quite liked the fact that I didn't really take many pictures. I just enjoyed the sunset rather than trying to take photos of them. But as my adventuring life has evolved, I've started to become really keen on photography now, and I really love it. The big breakthrough for me was the Canon 5D that started to make be able to film as well as
the 5D
take photographs.
Yeah, the 5D
exactly.
was the one, yeah.
And the quality of that video, this was sort of 2008, 2009, just seeing the quality of this video in a relatively affordable camera just blew my mind. I thought, wow, this is a direction I want to get on board with. So since then, I've got really keen on photography, and I took 3,000 photos in 4 years around the world. I sometimes now take 3,000 photos in a weekend camping. It's ridiculous.
I was going to say that there will be wedding photographers that take 3,000 pictures in a day, and you had that adventure. But I promised I wouldn't ask what did you learn about yourself, but what is how many words is that? Six words. I am going to ask the question, because when you start out with that sort of adventure, it's a mammoth adventure through some pretty exposed, and I would add dangerous areas at times too, because you don't take big support teams with you, even on the Atlantic crossing, which we'll come to as well. What was it that you learned about yourself then that sort of forged this career as, I mean, it's a pretty decent business card, adventure.
Yes, it is good. I've actually got literal business cards with my photos on. So here's one of me in an igloo. There's a bike in Vietnam, me on a kayak, me jumping naked into a sea somewhere, running through the Sahara Desert. So yeah, I've got some nice business cards.
What's the word? What's the description? Explorer or adventurer?
Alastair Humphreys, adventurer, speaker, author.
Right. Good. adventurer.
So what I learnt about myself, I think, was that I was neither as heroic nor pathetic as I'm occasionally tempted to think. So cycling around the world on my own for 4 years is quite a humbling experience. A lot of the time I was quite sad, out of my depth, certain I was going to fail, close to giving up, and they're quite introspective times. But then equally, I persevered. I kept on going. I crossed deserts and frozen places, and I managed to come through difficult situations. And that then gave me a good boost to my self-confidence that, hey, actually, I can persevere and plug away and get stuff done. So it was good for chopping off any hubris or narcissism you might have, but also geeing yourself up that if you can get through a long journey, then, hey, maybe you can plug on okay in life.
This anti-Olympian theory is interesting, though, that you can be a mere mortal next door guy or girl and make these adventures. That having an imposter syndrome, something we talk about quite often on the show, actually, Alastair. It can be mentally challenging, but it's not or doesn't have to be a stop sign.
Yeah, absolutely. So I began adventuring in no small part because I had a chip on my shoulder about being a weedy, skinny bit of a loser who never got in any of the sports teams at school, and was very much just trying to push myself physically in a way that I'd never done before. So I'm 100% not an athlete. And the majority of so-called adventurers who I know, quite a few of my friends now, we're pretty much all just a bunch of losers with a massive chip on our shoulder. And I suppose a stubborn perseverance to keep going.
Yeah, I like the Scandic phrase, and this is one of your books, actually. You quote, of starting a journey or adventure being the doorstep mile. What is the doorstep mile?
I suppose carrying on from my last answer about feeling like a bit of a loser quite often, I was really disappointed with myself. Whenever I start a journey, I'm not really excited to get out the door and get going. So I enjoy coming up with the ideas for adventure when you're warm and dry at home or sitting in a pub. That's really fun, dreaming of adventure. When the actual time comes to actually begin, I'm never excited or happy. I'm usually desperate for an excuse. I wish I could twist my ankle and get to go home. And I used to really beat myself up about this until I learnt this phrase, the doorstep mile, which essentially suggests that the hardest mile or the longest mile of a journey is just stepping across your doorstep and beginning. Yeah. And it's the sort of truism that we hear quite often, but it really resonated with me to put a name to the way I was actually feeling. And it's given me a lot of confidence now to just accept that I'm going to find the first step of a journey out my front door hard. That's fine because it's normal. It's normal because there's a proper word to describe it. And then once I get going and you get some momentum, then that's when the enjoyment and the satisfaction comes.
I'm going to ask you a question you must have asked yourself then, when we think about the doorstep mile, when it came to this next adventure. What makes a sane person want to row across the Atlantic?
Well, I never really did want to row across the Atlantic, to be honest. I like journeys that are simple but not easy, that are fairly low in terms of logistics and costs. So, bicycling somewhere or walking across India or something like that. Whereas rowing an ocean requires having to get funding, the big complicated boat and all sorts of stuff that I find quite boring. So it never really crossed my radar. But then one day I got an email from some random guy in Slovenia who I didn't know at all, but he'd been reading my website and he had done all this boring stuff of putting together a crew and getting a boat and getting the funding and getting everything going for 4 of them to row the Atlantic. But for various reasons, one of them had to leave the expedition and they were about to set sail to row across the Atlantic in just 6 weeks' time. Did I fancy just jumping in at last minute? So in terms of the doorstep mile, if someone sends you an email saying, hi, do you want to come row the Atlantic? We've done all the admin. All you've got to do is get in the boat and set off. Then you really should seize that opportunity and say yes. And that's the hardest part. Just say yes. And then, I essentially set off to row the ocean with 3 total strangers. It was quite an interesting gamble, I suppose, but it turned into a very interesting experience. I wouldn't say it was fun. It was pretty hard, but I'm very glad that I've done it.
You have a lot of faith in people, don't you? I think that's something that I've recognised from reading about you, watching you, learning a bit about you more in the last 20, 25 minutes as well, that you invest faith in people. And that's something that you don't see in a lot of people when it comes to these sort of decisions. And I'll say again, risks. When
I set off on my first big journey, so to cycle around the world, my main worry beforehand was about all these horrible people I would meet when I got off into all these horrible foreign countries. And all these people would say to me, oh, you can't go cycle through that country. They're all terrorists or murderers or whatever in that sort of country. And there's a real sort of negativity about humans. So I cycled off quite anxious about humans as being my biggest worry on the trip. And a classic example would be the Middle East. As I rode through Turkey, heading towards the Syrian border, and then I was going to ride through Lebanon, I realized I was so afraid. What was I afraid of? I'd never been to this place before. And yet my preconceptions from a lifetime of watching the news or people telling me their stereotypical preconceptions had built into me this fear. And yet when I rode through the Middle East, it was incredibly welcoming, warm, friendly, kind. And my whole experience from going around the world, and you meet so many people who've traveled a lot who say the same thing, but is that the world essentially is a good, decent place with some bad stuff happening rather than the other way around. So I had so many good experiences that I try now to just remind myself just to assume the best of things. And generally, nearly always, that proves to be the right way of doing it.
Just to backpedal slightly into the ocean, actually, though, I'm intrigued.
Mixing your metaphors there.
It was a bit, really. I wish it wasn't as clumsy as that. It was almost clever, wasn't it?
It started off clever.
It did. It promised, but it just didn't deliver. We're very alike. I'm almost looking in a mirror when we consider what we felt about ourselves when we were at school. But you weren't always supported in that small boat in an ocean up to 4,000 meters deep, were you? There were times where you were truly on your own. I mean, I know you had your rowers with you, but you were on your own.
Yeah, we didn't have any backup crew or support crew. You sometimes see on the news, there's a race across the Atlantic Ocean, which is people rowing these exactly the same boats as us. But when you do the race, there's all your other crews dotted around who are some sort of probably more theoretical moral support than actual help. There's also a rescue boat, a sailing boat that goes around to keep an eye on people. But we didn't want to enter the race because it was expensive and we weren't really interested in racing anyone. And so, yeah, when we set off to row, it was just us out in the Atlantic Ocean. Often the nearest people to us were the astronauts on the International Space Station. And if anything truly bad happens in the middle of the ocean, all you can do is just put out a mayday call and hope that some passing ship will come your way and pick you up. So yeah, it really was a exercise in self-dependency.
Did you think about things like that when in those moments where you had any downtime that you thought, you know, the space station's actually closer to me than any other human right now?
Yeah, we often thought about that, but generally in a sense of awe and wonder, like, wow, isn't this fantastic? Yeah. I'm very far from the nearest Tesco Express or the nearest traffic warden or whatever emails are coming in. There's literally nothing on this planet I can do about any of those things. And that's incredibly liberating. I mean, these big remote adventures and expeditions are very much about just running away from real life, because it's so much easier to go walk across a desert than it is to just cope with normal life, I think.
Note to self, I must find myself a desert then. I can't believe you didn't argue once with your crew.
So the other three guys knew each other well. They'd been preparing for this journey for a long time, but I was a stranger, parachuted into them. But we didn't argue, and I think the success for rowing an ocean is not just to get 4 of the toughest, strongest rowers you can possibly find. It's to find 4 people who are kind and self-deprecating. I think it would go without saying that if you're going to go on a big adventure, you should try and help other people, support the guy who's struggling, do a bit of extra jobs, help them out. And that's a sort of obvious thing. What I think is much more difficult and less spoken about, but I think was vital to our harmonious journey, was when someone offers you help. Particularly, I find as a man, I find it quite hard to accept that help. So if someone said to me, "Oh, Al, you're looking weak and struggling today on the rowing, let me help you," my instinct is to say, "No, I'm not weak or struggling. Look, I'll show you," and I'll just row and row and row until I collapse, which is stupid because that doesn't actually help your team get across the ocean. So just being able to say, "Yes, thank you. I am really struggling today and I appreciate your help and thank you." And you know that you'll pass that back at some point. So I think that accepting of kindness was really important.
Did you get really rough seas out there? What are your sea legs like?
Well, we got some pretty rough seas, but unfortunately the worst of it came in the first few days. So we were all vomiting furiously. We hadn't yet got our sea legs. So we had some terrible weather. So you operate on a 2 people row at a time and 2 people rest. And you do 2 hours of rowing, 2 hours of resting, 2 hours of rowing, 2 hours of resting. So it's this insane exercise in sleep deprivation. So sleep deprivation, seasick, and heavy weather and storms coming in the first few days when we didn't quite know what we were doing, didn't quite know where we'd put everything, was a pretty traumatic, stressful start to the journey. It was absolutely horrible. I would have paid a spectacular amount of money for a helicopter to come winch me off in those few days. But a good thing about an adventure like rowing the ocean is that once you've committed, once you push away from the harbour and row out to sea, that's it. You can't. I mean, once the current takes you, you can't turn around and go back. Not for £1 million. £1 million wouldn't get you off that boat. The only thing to do is just think, well, here I am. There's no possible way out, which was very different to, say, my cycling trip, where at any moment I could have just said, enough's enough, quit, and gone home.
And Alastair Humphreys returns shortly. Oh, it is blowing what we call in the family a hoolie. It did say it was going to be a bit brisk. This feels a lot more than 15, 16 miles an hour. Woof! I'm being cautious which way I point the microphone, so we don't end up just hearing just a howling sound for the next few moments. Right, if you'd like to send in some letters, then I'd love to hear from you. Take a moment over the holiday period, as most of the world call it, or crimbles, to write in your thoughts about photography, your own adventures that you make, since adventure is the key word today for sure. Then send in your stories to stories@photowalk.show, the email address for the show. If you're sending in pictures, I love to receive these. They can be sketchbooks, or they can be these grand vistas. Really anything, as you're just about to find out in a moment, actually. Send them to stories@photowalk.show. Send them as 2,500 pixel wide pictures if you can, if you have the know-how. If you're thinking 2,500 wattles, because you're a hiker and the good old, well, I was going to say iPhone, but other flavours of smartphone available, of course, and you're not really aware of how you resize a picture, then send it in as it is, full resolution, and I'll do is it heavy lifting, Neil? Yes, I'll do the heavy lifting for you. Here's a letter from Alan Sorensen. Greetings, he says, from frosty Missouri. Now, I looked up the average temperature across Missouri for today, and Alan, with 2 L's, because I know some people think whenever I say, because Alan's one of our regular contributors, if I say Alan, it makes me sound like I'm in Essex. Alan, you should be basking in 14 degrees today. I know it's -3, it does drop a bit overnight, but that doesn't sound too frosty, unless of course you're doing the night shift. Anyway, that's the weather forecast for Missouri. Your reference, says Alan, to You'll Never Walk Alone in the episode where you walked in Liverpool with Mally piqued my interest in this favourite song that's been used time and time again to rouse and inspire. Now, the 1945 musical from which it was from originally was revived in 2018. And a former student of mine, Erica Spires, was in the Broadway cast. You taught Erica Spires? The actor, the singer, the fiddle player. I am impressed, with a capital I. As you alluded to, it's grown far past its humble roots. It's a football anthem for Liverpool, which is, of course, what I mentioned, not appreciating that it does actually have a history before it became a football anthem. It's also a support song for medical staff, first responders, and those who were in quarantine during the COVID-19 period. It's sometimes treated by performers as a religious song, and you referenced Elvis Presley's version. Now, I know I should know this, But where was I asleep that day? I just don't remember it as being an Elvis song. Oh, Neil, really? You came from a music background in radio, I know. I'll hang my head in shame. This is clearly something I should have known. I now feel more educated, thank you. Especially as there I was thinking only fans sung it on Anfield's Cop, which is a footy stadium terrace in Liverpool. On another topic, your focus on why has me contemplating if our why can change over time, because I think it can, says Alan. Or at least I think it's been evolving for me over a complete lifetime. My first reaction when you posed the question of why was to align it with the National Geographic photographer Stephen Alvarez, who said, since the invention of the camera, this has been the photographer's role, to make the unknown known. And most of my photographs, says Alan, over the past decade have reflected that idea of capturing a world that most people either can't or won't bother to stop and observe. I suppose, well, I don't suppose, this is where the sketchbook imaging or the sketchbook making, sketchbook photographing comes in, those somethings and nothings. You know, they're not great vista pictures, but they are important because they're our experience of the world, aren't they? That's what they are. I was recently looking at old photos I took as a teenager, and I noticed a pattern that I've been falling into more and more. One that captures memories, especially of friends and family who might otherwise not have been taken. Apparently, though, I've been doing this all my life. As I get older, photos of people are becoming more important, and making that gift available to future generations has become a real passion. So I think your question of why is maybe more complex and deeper than at first glance. It's certainly something I've begun asking about other aspects of my life with some interesting insights. Anyway, attached are a few photos of fond memories which won't have any meaning for you or your other listener, but are very dear to me and my family. Best wishes and good health on this holiday season. Come on, pups, this way. Oh, he's chasing swans, Alan. Don't be doing that. Alan, if it's okay with you, I'm going to pop those pictures on the show page. I know they're quite personal, but I think that's the point of this. Yes, Neil, that's why I sent it. Because they demonstrate perfectly the importance of documentation, which is enough of a why in itself for many photographers, isn't it? And to quote Stephen Alvarez back to you, I didn't know this quote, but I'm going to quote it back to you. Since the invention of the camera, this has been the photographer's role, to make the unknown known. And for those who visit the show page today, your unknown, Alan, is now slightly more known. It's the Photowalk show in windy Berkshireville. Oh dear, it's bitter actually. These are the cold days. It's actually a mild-ish day, but the wind chill factor, bitter. I must make some more sketchbooks. I've made a couple as I've been walking along. I do have a few more for you. Not been as prolific as usual. Some days you just see everything you want to photograph, don't you? Other days, see, this is quite interesting. I like this for all the moss, the lichen, and everything that's grown over it. It's a tree that's fallen, but I quite like the shape. Quick sketchbook, 1/2 f4. Light's failing a bit, it seems. There's some big ominous clouds. ISO 640. That's my reference. But welcome along to the Photowalk show. Thank you for joining us each week on our walks. It's a show for hikers and walkers and photographers of whatever kind and experience. A show for those who find escapism and peace away from the noise of this world, putting miles under our feet and making a picture or three to remind us of where those footprints were left. Right, the assignment for this month. This is a challenge, I believe. I'm going to let Dwayne Patton revisit it for us over the next minute and a half. It's the assignment. Where's Pups going? This way. It's the assignment for the month of December, but I may let this run into January. This one will be a literal stretch, as you'll find out. Good luck. And here's Dwayne.
The Photowalk assignment.
Dwayne, let's go for an assignment from you. I'm not sure whether this will be something to do with birding or wildlife, or it probably is going to be along that line, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask everybody to get up early. Mm-hmm. I know some people don't like to get up early.
What is early, by the way, in your language?
Before the sun comes up. So I want you to go to a local wetland,
right,
somewhere where there's water birds, ducks or swans or whatever there might be, and I want you to get there before the sun has come up. And then I want you to get into a position that you can get to as low to the water as you can, that is comfortable without exposing yourself too much. The lower you can get, the better. So wetland, early, get down nice and low, and then wait for the sun to start coming up. Mm-hmm. And once that sun starts to come up, try to capture that early morning light with some sort of water bird going about its business, whether it's a duck or a swan. And you can go as wide as you want or as narrow as you want. And I'm sure you'll have a great time and capture some beautiful shots.
I was going to ask about the lens, but you said go wide or as long as you like. So that's
correct.
It's not about the kit, this, is it?
Not at all. Any camera or lens. It's more about getting out into the field and just experiencing nature, listening to the wildlife, listening to the birds, and just watching them go about their business. There's something very rewarding and relaxing about watching wildlife just go about. And if you can get a capture and a memento of that in beautiful light, nothing beats it.
The Photowalk assignment.
Good luck for the assignment this month set by our bird photographer in Australia, Dwayne Patton. I think I will leave it open, just edging into January. We have an interesting month in January for all sorts of reasons. So we're off to Africa, as you know. Sean will be starting with us. The Malleys coming back for Treedom, and Valerie, of course, will continue her series on called Visual Stories on street photography. It's not always street photography, actually. Valerie's going to be talking about other areas of photography as well, because she's a fabulous mentor in the world of photography, outside of simply the work that she's known for, that work being street photography. So I was recording the Extra Mile this week, which is episode 66, over on our Patreon channel, which is available as I speak. Ding, he says with a glint in his eye, with a photographer, a gallery owner, a walker, an environmentalist, an adventurer. Hang on, are you describing our Alastair again? No. This adventurer is Sarah Moorcroft. And for that description, Sarah may well now be shifting uncomfortably on that imaginary sofa that comes out on these walks, the one that we hide behind it when there's stuff to be Englishly coy about. Well, certainly I hide behind it at any rate. See, Sarah, by her own admission, doesn't necessarily stand in the headlamps of praise very comfortably. And I'm not speaking out of turn, I think, because it's something we talk about on the Extra Mile this week. I wonder how many, though, of us really don't appreciate the adventurers that we truly are. As the second part of my chat shortly with Alastair will underline. But Sarah, I will stand by my business card description of you, because it's true. You are one of 3 artists who run a gallery. You are an environmentalist. Sarah's one of the voices, I'll have you know, working very hard to protect the rainforest. Now, this was... I knew about rainforests in the UK. I think I sound very surprised within the interview with Sarah. Perhaps I'm authentically so. But I'm not that au fait with the rich nature of the rainforests that we have down the the western side of these isles in particular, and certainly where Sarah is in Scotland. So yes, she's doing a lot of work to protect the rainforests in her region. And you, Sarah, have hiked and photographed some of the UK's and Europe's most stunning places of natural beauty. Maybe they are not the 7 summits which do include Everest. But as we find out today, adventure and exploration comes in many forms. And Sarah, I think, really epitomises that within our conversation. Her adventures include a real 2023 leap of faith to open a small gallery in Scotland where she, as I say, now lives. It's a modestly but perfectly sized space that's become her way to show the beauty that's walkable from her front door. I'd like to play you a couple of minutes, actually, from my conversation with Sarah, so you can learn a little bit more about her. Here's Sarah Moorcroft.
Walking in itself, being out in nature, it helps you connect yourself a bit, gives you some headspace to think and, just work through things. I almost always have a dog walking with me. It's something that, so I don't believe I walk alone. I always have the dog with me. And that's just that companionship, because I like that. But I think walking gives you space to think, gives you space to work out some of your challenges. The long distance walks we've done have, I'm going to go as far as say, been transformative at times, because I'm not nature's brave person. So actually, I'm frightened of heights. Yeah, the whole lot of it's a bit scary. As you know, I'm not that keen on people. I mean, I don't mind people. People are fine, but en masse, I find them a bit alarming. And when you do the European hikes in particular, you end up staying in mountain huts on top of passes in the most beautiful, remote, magical places with glaciers tumbling down the mountains opposite you. And you're staying in a refugio or a refuge, and you might be sharing a room with a dozen other people. That's kind of, that gets you out of your comfort zone.
Yeah. A refugio. Or refuge.
Yeah.
So
a lot of them,
is it just a building? Is it no toilets or showering facilities? Or
no. In the main.
Right.
It's, imagine a ski chalet. The ski places at the top of the ski slopes, which are open all winter. Sometimes in the summer, those are used for accommodation for hikers. Some are sort of very much purpose built. They tend to have communal eating areas, showers, which are like €3 for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Learn to be efficient.
I'd like that. Do you know what? I thank you for telling me that. I'm going to take that story to my youngest tonight, immediately after our conversation. When he gets home from school, I'm going to say, right, sit down here. Here's €3. After 3 minutes, I'm going to turn the heating off. Spend it wisely. I like the fact that this week has an adventurous theme. I really do. And Sarah, I think of you as an adventurer. When we talked, and I was fascinated by the journeys that you make. Some of them, yes, they're not far. They're only a couple of miles from where you live. But in themselves, in and of themselves, are adventures, which is a very good cue for part 2 of my conversation this week with Alastair Humphreys, adventurer, photographer, author and inventor, which may actually, if he's listening back, make Alastair sit up and think, hang on, hold your horses. Nobody mentioned inventor on my bio, but I think as well as a doorstep from which to take your first steps, you equally need a very creative mind. Where do your adventures come from, Alastair? Because, I mean, you've done stuff. Well, you mentioned the marathon across the desert as the bike ride. These are physical and mental challenging places and roles and things, but you've also challenged yourself with the comedically daft, as in learning to play a violin in 7 months so that you can go and busk in a foreign country. Where do the ideas come from? That's a bit left field, the violin one. But equally the desert, running across a desert.
So I crossed the empty quarter desert in the Middle East directly retracing the route of Wilfred Thesiger, a fantastic book that I enjoyed. Playing the violin, I imagine some listeners might already have twigged the connection there between Laurie Lee, who walked through Spain in the 1930s, wrote a beautiful travel book, my favorite travel book about playing the violin. And I'd always loved that book and loved that journey. But to go back to your very first question of what does adventure mean to me, I'd realized that after doing years and years of these sort of big, tough, crazy, but fairly sort of standard expeditions, I was pretty good at them. I was pretty good at having a miserable time, and I was pretty good at putting my tent up and doing it again tomorrow and not giving up. And that's really all you need. And so I sort of knew that if I went off and did a big expedition, I'd probably finish it. So was that actually an adventure, or was that my own version of just being in a rut and a routine? And therefore, if I really wanted to get back the risk and the uncertainty and the fear of failure and the doubt and the terror, then perhaps what I needed to do was think differently about adventure. And that gave me the idea of busking through Spain. You know, I have no musical talent. Performing in public, I find absolutely terrifying. There was a huge chance of failure and disaster. It was the perfect thing for an adventure.
I might have done this slightly out of order, actually. The film I saw you speak on took you to a red tent in Greenland, which was to be a precursor, really, to a massive adventure that didn't actually happen. That was the start of the micro adventures and the change of thought in what an adventure actually is. Why did that adventure not happen? What happened in that red tent in Greenland?
So I was training for a South Pole expedition, which was another exercise in chasing huge amounts of funding and money and sponsorship and admin and organizing, all the sort of things that I hate. But I felt it was worth it in this case to go on a incredible journey to Antarctica, to do something really difficult, to retrace Captain Scott's journey. And at that time, I was measuring my career and my own personal self-worth in terms of doing ever more difficult and challenging expeditions and sort of earning a living from that. So I was willing to chase this South Pole project for 5 years. But then, the chronologies of life are all a bit complicated. So within all of this time frame, I got married, had a couple of kids, all very wonderful. But my kids were tiny. But the conflict between myself trying to be this adventurous individual for whom these adventures were really wrapped up with my identity and what felt like a meaningful life to me, versus my other role in life now to try and be a good husband and dad, which is definitely not compatible with clearing off to Antarctica to clown around for a few months, which is probably how my wife would have described the expedition. It just came to a head when we were on a training expedition in Greenland, and it was an incredible landscape. We had some great sponsors. We had some spectacularly expensive camera lenses with us. It was just a wonderful, it was lovely experience.
Incredible, yeah.
And I was with two fantastic guys, a photographer called Martin Hartley, and then Ben Saunders, the guy who's going to the South Pole with. I was just having the time of my life. I loved it. But I also realized that I was leaving my wife to do all the hard work and two little kids back home. And the clash between those two lives just came to a bit of a head on the ice cap in Greenland. And I just thought, no, this isn't it. I have to make a choice here. And I chose to ditch the big expeditions and do something else with my life and try and be a good dad.
Well, this is where micro adventures come in. Was that your invention, micro adventures?
Yes. So linking together this and the question you asked a while ago about people saying yes, but, and finding things to stop them getting away of adventure. And then a third aspect of me realizing that whether I was on an ice cap in Greenland or sweating away and walking through India or wherever I was, very different places. But what I was getting from those adventures was a similar kind of thing. It's all a sort of internal challenge reward sort of stuff, which got me thinking that maybe I didn't need to go to all these exotic places to find it. If it was all just in my head and my heart, maybe I could find this adventure stuff close to home. So a mixture of my own circumstances, a realization that maybe I can find adventure close to home, and the sense that loads of people love hearing about adventures and reading books about them, but not many people are doing them, often because of the perceived obstacles in their lives, led me to thinking, right, how can I take what I love about adventure, look at the obstacles, the barriers, the excuses that people put out, and find in their place short, simple, local, affordable alternatives to these things. So you can't go cycle around the world for 4 years do you then sit on the sofa and watch Netflix and grumble, or do you maybe just put a sleeping bag on the back of your bike and go cycle around the Isle of Wight for a weekend or something? So I started just trying to find really short things to help facilitate people to get out the front door and take their first steps towards adventure, on the premise that it's always better to do a little bit of adventure than to do no adventure. So I called these things micro adventures, and they became, well, I suppose they're accessible, they're relatable, and it proved that actually they're much more interesting to people than yet another middle-class white man showing off about how tough he is. And the community of people who started to do this stuff grew a lot, and I found that I'm now quite happy to be Mr. Micro Adventures guy rather than Mr. South Pole man.
It's interesting, isn't it? The people, because it's more relatable, the uplift in traffic, if you like, the people that are interested, it becomes larger because they think, oh, hang on, I can walk around. I mean, the one walking around the M25 I love. There's comedy in that for me because I can't believe the amount of times I've sat on that motorway. You were probably walking it faster than I've driven it at times.
Yes.
But walking around the arterials motorway, that around London, that's the M25. Eating curry is one mention in the film. In a cave, wasn't it? Eating takeaway curry in a cave.
A cave in the Peak District, yeah.
Cave in the Peak District. These are great ideas. So where do these ideas come from? Okay, so I get that you can sort of check in with the big adventurers like Captain Cook and think, right, let me emulate that. But nobody's walked the M25 before.
So I suppose that, like any habit you start to build, you start to get better at doing things. So over time, I've got really good now. If you show me a map of somewhere, I'll look on that map and I'll immediately start thinking, oh, look, you see that way that river valley leads down there? That looks quite an interesting route to follow. And then there's that wood with a really nice east-facing contour lines. That'd be a great place to set my tent up and get a photo of the sunrise. So I'm quite good at interpreting landscapes like that. When I'm on a train or driving in a car, whenever you go over a bridge, I always peer down to try and see, oh, is that a good place to wild camp down there? Or is that river good for swimming or canoeing? So I'm quite tuned into just looking for adventure opportunities wherever I go. And then in terms of coming up with micro adventure ideas, I would try to think what is stopping people having an adventure and then think of an alternative to that. So just trying to find shorter versions or cheaper versions or more local versions. So it's great. It'd be fantastic to pause your work for a while and go and climb Mount Everest. That'd be a great thing to do, but probably not going to realistically happen. So, right, let's have a think about this. Okay, how about when you finish work this evening, instead of going home just to watch Netflix, get on the train, head out of your town, and within half an hour of wherever you live, in wherever you are really, you will be in some countryside. And then you just get out of the train, find a local hill from me browsing maps, go sleep on the hill for a night, sleep under the stars, wake up in the morning, run back down the hill, have a quick swim in the river, back on the train, back to your desk for 9 o'clock the next morning. So there's a little idea that just comes from brainstorming. Oh, I'd like to climb Everest, but I can't. So then what opportunity does come? And then I also enjoy reading maps. I like browsing through magazine like National Geographic. You find all these beautiful photos, and that sort of sets you off with different ideas. I read lots of books, and I suppose I've just been in the habit now of 20 odd years just always thinking of, oh, what's an adventurous idea to come up with here?
Yeah, your kids have probably the coolest dad, but I want to come to that in a moment. You did actually inspire me to think, oh, I've actually taken a few micro adventures this year. I went to and climbed with a friend Mole Shabod in Wales in Snowdonia. Now, I can't, and I don't think I'd ever wish to climb Everest, but that was my micro adventure. Many, many, many times smaller than the peak of Everest, obviously, but it was still challenging for me. Challenging is what this is all about, and challenging the challenges that we can physically and mentally do.
It's challenges on a personal level. I think that's a really important thing. There's a comparative element. So sometimes, say, if I do a talk at some venue, people come and chat to me at the end, and they often say something really nice and well-meaning, like, oh, I did an adventure once. It was nothing like yours, but they want to tell me about the thing that they've done.
Yeah.
And I say, it's exactly like mine. So you went to Wales, you climbed this mountain, so you know as well as anyone what it's like to be in some countryside, to get a bit tired, to be out of breath, to get that nice feeling on the top of the hill, the sense of achievement. Yeah. So the notion that these things are comparative is really unhelpful. And what I try to emphasize is that if it feels like an adventure to you, then it is an adventure, and that's great. And you remember it, don't you? For the rest of the year, you remember it, and that if you just make the effort to get out and do something a bit different.
Well, you're photographing more now. That's for sure. I've had a good look through your Flickr. We have a phrase on our show called sketchbooking, and I think you do an awful lot of that while you're on your tours, on your adventures, because you do notice the things when you're walking along a path that just maybe don't seem interesting in themselves, but they are in context of a whole walk.
Well, photography has been really important to me, except when I cycled the entire way around the world, the greatest ever photography project, and couldn't be bothered to take any photos. But since then, I've come to really love it, and it's really helped me see the journeys that I do more clearly. But it's been of specific interest to me in the last year or so, when I set out to try and explore close to home. And my natural temptation in life, I'm quite hyperactive, so I tend to just dash around madly. And then I'm also have this terrible habit of thinking, what am I doing out here? Wasting time. I should be at home sending emails or something ridiculous like that. This sort of compulsion to be busy. So by going out locally and actually taking my camera with me, so not my phone, but an actual camera held in my actual hand, just kept reminding me to slow down, to look, to pay attention, to be curious, and to try to see the interest and beauty in everything, like the burned out car or the smashed glass on the pavement. If you get down on your knees and think about it, you can make that look beautiful and interesting. So yeah, photography is really important to me now, mostly to make myself slow down and to pay attention.
I'd like to talk more about your books as well. As someone writing his first, and that seems to be my current adventure. Maybe that's my new micro adventure. You've published 14. It seems to me that mental health plays a very important role in your titles, such as Moods of Future Joy. I love the sound of that. What's that about?
Gosh, no one's ever said that to me before. My first book's called Moods of Future Joys, which I love as a title, but friends of mine widely mock it for its ridiculous pretentiousness. And
I love it.
Publishers decry it for being totally useless and non-descriptive, but it's about cycling down Africa. So my first adventure and my first book, and it comes from a Ben Okri poem, and the line is, all that you are experiencing will become moods of future joys, so bless it now. So even when you're having a rubbish time or it's hard, they will become moods of future joys. So bless them, be grateful for them, and just suck it up and be in the moment, I suppose. So I'm glad you like that title.
No, I love it. And you're very prolific with your books, aren't you?
In my ideal world, I'd like to, if someone says, what do you do? I'd like to say to them, my name's Alastair Humphreys and I'm an author. I still feel too much of an imposter to do that, really. But I would love, in a dream world, for writing just to be my job and my income and everything. So I'm quite disciplined, and my sort of standard daily 9 to 5 activity is book writing. So I try to do one a year. That's the challenge I try to go for. The
on Flickr, I love the collection just called Local, which is a book. Now that's what I mean by sketchbooking, with the stuff of life that you find along the way as you've identified. But what about your filmmaking? Because you have a YouTube channel. What's becoming or become of that?
So filmmaking was a huge part for me from 2009 when I discovered the Canon 5D Mark II, and I bought it. Oh, and actually with my friend Chris Herwig, the bus stop guy, he and I crossed Iceland together by foot and by these little boats, and that was my teach yourself how to use a camera thing. And since then, I've got really into filming my adventures, and I absolutely loved it. I filmed the Spain trip. I made a film about that, so I loved it. However, filming stuff takes quite a while, but then editing it takes an absolute eternity. Whereas with photograph, you just click, doom, stick it online, and you're done. Send it off to Getty, get paid £10,000. Boom. I haven't mastered that part, but the first part of it is
can
there.
You tell us? Can you write a book about that bit?
Click the picture, boom, it's done. Writing, go off, have an adventure, come home and just make stuff up out of your head and write about it. So filmmaking takes so long.
And looking at the YouTube channel, I noticed that you've not done so much of late. Is it likely to be something that you come back to record your adventures?
I'd like to, but this sort of goes back round to the earlier thing of, am I going to be the adventure guy going off filming stuff, or am I going to be home and take my kids to school and pick them up at 3:00? So it's that pragmatic phase of life. But I really love filming stuff.
Talking about your kids, I'm intrigued, by the way. Where does an adventurer go for his holidays with a family? I mean, the family must think, what on earth are we going to end up? Alastair could take us anywhere.
Well, I think a good thing about having a family is they keep you firmly on the ground. So my kids just think I'm a boring loser, really. It's like most people's kids do. So I try and do adventurous stuff with them, but I want them to enjoy time in the outdoors, and I want them to want to be in the outdoors. I don't want them to think, oh God, we're going to get dragged up another mountain this weekend. So I don't do a particularly vast amount of things. My wife also, she's far more sensible than me. She thinks that adventuring is stupid and ridiculous. So we tend to have very normal, nice holidays.
Have you become a circuit speaker as well? I think you have, haven't you? I know you speak to schools, but speaking on the circuit and speaking to, being in front of the pinstripes.
So when I decided to quit teaching and try and make adventure my job, the way that I paid the bills for the first few years was by talking in schools. And then my speak, I guess, as you get a bit better and stuff, I'd move on to corporate stuff. And corporate speaking is the majority of my income. And then for a few years was doing some filming stuff for brands, like making little adventure films in partnership with brands. And then a small percentage from my writing of books. But writing books is what I really want to do. So with lockdown, really, I thought, right, I'm going to really cut back massively on my speaking work, because if I want to be a writer, then I have to just put some skin in the game and dare myself to write. So I do talks. I enjoy them. I think they're quite worthwhile, but I don't do that many these days.
No. In terms of motivation for a micro-adventurer, you're perfectly positioned to answer our final question that I have in all interviews. It's a 3-letter question, and it is simply, why? What is your why?
Well, that also changes a lot over time, and I think a really important thing for me personally has been to realize that the why changes over time, and to allow my why to change over time. And what I mean by that is, when I first started, my why was to sort of live the most tough, fascinating, adventurous, ambitious life I possibly could. Essentially, I want to be Ranulph Fiennes, and that was a fantastic why to focus me for many years, until I found myself in that red tent in Greenland, realizing that was completely incompatible with what now is actually a much more important part of my life. And so my why now is different to what it would have been even a few years ago. So to actually get on and answer your question, my why now is that I really love life. I really love the world, and being curious and enthusiastic and paying attention to all this magical stuff all around me is my main motivation, I think.
And my thanks to Alastair Humphreys. I will, of course, link to his work. The website is a great place to go, by the way, for all our links to everything from the shows themselves to the assignments, to the survey, yes. And over the next few days, oh, how I wish I was releasing it today, the book, Neil, yes, the book. I don't mean A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, for all those that know of the book as the book. But it's my book, the first book of why, my first book. Which is a very, very personal account of my why, followed by the whys I've collated from guests. It's about to be released, but there's a few things I need to finish with it, including checking something with one of my family about the very personal nature of the opening chapter, actually. But watch this space. There'll be a newsletter coming out shortly as well, which will have links to the book. And that's it for today. Our walk, our rather windy walk along the riverbank, along the Kennet and Avon Canal. I do love this walk. I tell you what, the waters, I mean, look at them. They've risen somewhat. They really have. We've had much rainfall. Must be time for a hosepipe ban. But I've never seen the river flowing quite like it is as well, which is probably a reason why I've not seen those that that swim early in the morning. I know it's brisk, but that doesn't usually stop them. I think it's more to do with the current, the flow, not the current, the flow. If you can't wait until next Friday and you'd like to walk a little bit further together, then the Extra Mile edition, number 66, is waiting for you. And, well, as you've heard, it features Sarah Moorcroft, plus some of the more big boys pants moments from our listener survey. All will be revealed or even revelled in. There's one I'm going to frame, and comments, that is, but not for what you might call pleasant reasons. Our PS to the show is to come, but before that, we need a play-out song just to make some final frames to. Well, think about what's been said today. Think about the adventuring and what Alastair said, and Sarah come to that matter. And the play-out song today is from Louis Island. It's a song called Stay. Essentially, it's a love song, really, but equally, I think it's a love song to the spirit of adventure. He says, sounding overtly and non-apologetically poetic in that respect. Spirit of Adventure was, of course, the... I say, of course, if you've watched the film, it's of course, but otherwise you're thinking, what? Is the name of the airship in the movie Up. That wonderful, wonderful animated movie, Up, which in itself is a beautiful story of adventure, isn't it? A man's quest to fulfill the dream of his late wife. Now that is a Crimble's film, isn't it? Anyway, from the song, these words: we could stay to watch the sunrise, cancel all our plans. We don't need a reason why we just can. Now, if that isn't a micro-adventure in itself, I don't know what is.
Later on in the night, when the crowds have gone, we could talk under moonlight till dawn. We could stay to watch the sunrise, cancel all our plans. We don't need a reason why we just can't. I wish I could stop time and stay in this moment, never think about going. Won't you stay with me for a little while? Got myself free falling deep into your eyes. You came to me without warning, but I knew why. I wish I could stop time and stay in this moment, never think about going. Won't you stay with me for a little while? Stay in this moment, never think about going. Won't you stay with me for a little while?
We're ending the walk as we started it. Rain and mud. The rain's beginning to fall, but the mud's a constant. Let's get a sketchbook, shall we? Final one for the show today. And I think I'll make it of this. I'm fascinated by these. We have lots of what's called pillboxes. I know what a pillbox is, Neil. All right. Along the Kennet and Avon Canal, which would have been here during the war, just in case this river was used as an arterial route, I suppose towards Bath and Bristol. It seems to me it would have been a bit late by the time it got here, unless we were protecting all the local pubs. But I know that this barbed wire wasn't put here during the war, but it's sort of, it plays in with the concrete of this structure. It's Let's get the camera out. I can't put the letters and stuff on the floor. They'll just get sopping. But let's photograph this. Where are we? It's F4. And, there we go. That's nice. Here we go. With the lichen on the build, on the moss on the building behind it, or the pillbox behind it. F4, 1/2/5. Oh, that wind's getting brisk. Surely that's not 2000 ISO. Has it got that dark? Are we about to get truly rained on, Barney? I think we possibly are. Just a few closing thoughts before the PS. My sincere thanks to you if you're about to, or you are an extra miler, or if you're about to become an extra miler. My promise to you is that we keep building this community of kindness, a safe place to share our thoughts about this thing we love, photographing and walking, of course. On the show page, there's some very handy buttons that you can, or will help you share the show. You can click those, and if you're logged into Facebook or Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, now X. Isn't it funny that people are still writing formerly known as Twitter? I wonder how long that will go on for. If you're logged into any of those and you click on our buttons, they take you straight to a page and you can share the show. My thanks to Neil Ford, who looks after IT, Andrea Gilpin, who's across Instagram, and Kelly Mitchell with Emily Rainier, who look after our Facebook members, write a postscript for the show. Now, I've got this one from Paulo Coelho, or the full name is actually Paulo Coelho de Souza. He is a Brazilian lyricist and novelist and, get this, member of the Brazilian Academy of Letters since 2002. That sounds a sort of academy I'd like to be a part of, an Academy of Letters. Fantastic. And these are words that I think for our adventuring tone today is absolutely spot on. He said, if you think adventure is dangerous, try routine. It's lethal. Come on, pups. Let's go find a warm place. What about a pub, eh? A sneaky pub visit on the way back. Some cheese and onion crisps. Oh, cheese and onion crisps. Now you're talking. Come on.
The Photowalk is a Loading Zone production.